10 Signs That You Will Prosper. Napoleon Hill. This might sound strange, even a bit controversial, but here's a truth that almost no one dares to say. Most people who will never prosper. He also believes that he will prosper. They have hope, faith, desire, but no signs. And the curious thing is that wealth rarely begins when money appears. It begins when something changes inside. Silently. Before the account fattens, before recognition, before the visible turnaround, there are clear indications, almost like clues left along the way. And if you are here now, feeling that you were born for more, it is quite possible that some of these signs are already operating within you. Napoleon Hill observed this while studying hundreds of successful people. Prosperity leaves traces before it manifests. These are not coincidences, nor luck, nor privilege. They are mental, emotional, and spiritual patterns that repeat themselves. The paradox is this: those closest to a turning point are usually those who feel most uncomfortable with ordinary life. It's as if something inside is saying, "That's not all." Ignoring that voice is costly. Listening to it can completely change your destiny. Throughout this video, you won't hear empty promises or magic formulas. What you will find are internal signals. Subtle behaviors and mindset shifts precede true prosperity. Some will comfort you, others will confront you, and that's precisely the point. Because growth doesn't begin when everything makes sense. It begins when something bothers you enough to change. Now, the question is simple. How many of these signs already live within you, even if you've never named them? Divine dissatisfaction with mediocrity. On the outside, life may seem okay, but inside there's a holy unease, kind of a can't-help-it silent. It's not anger towards people, nor contempt for those who live with the bare minimum. It's just that, for you, more of the same seems too small. And then comes the shock. Many people call this ingratitude, but you begin to understand that it can be headquarters of purpose. Because prosperity doesn't begin in your pocket. It begins in mentality, who refuses to become a statistic. And look, this restlessness is usually the first sign of faith moving inside. When someone carries that fire, they begin to notice details that previously went unnoticed. Shallow conversation is tiresome. Aimless routine is draining. They feel they were born to build something, leave a legacy, live with purpose, and not just survive by paying bills and waiting for Friday. So you make a simple and powerful choice. Exchange distraction for direction, little by little, without drama and without posing. A practical example? You reduce the endless scroll and put 20 minutes a day into something that changes your mind. A chapter, an audio, a note. And then, discipline. It begins to become an identity. Because a mind nourished by vision no longer accepts crumbs. But there's a point that almost no one talks about. This dissatisfaction becomes a trap if you use it as an excuse to criticize everything and do nothing. Therefore, you learn to transform discomfort into a plan. What can I do today, with what I have, in the way I can? A simple action. You write down 3 goals for the week and choose a daily micro-action related to money and value. Selling something, studying offers, improving a service. Because prosperity, it's not magic. It's direction plus repetition plus courage. And that combines with faith when it becomes a movement. And this is where the game changes. Because in the next step, you need to stop blaming the world and take the wheel for good. There's a quiet moment, almost invisible, when something changes inside you. It's not a big motivational speech. It's not a viral video. It's a click internally. You realize that blaming the government, the boss, the family, or fate only soothes the ego but keeps life in the same place. And then comes the turning point. While he outsources the blame, you relinquish control. But when you take responsibility, even trembling, you regain power. From that point on, the internal dialogue changes completely. Instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" you start asking, "What is this teaching me?" It may seem like a small detail, but this change in question alters the mentality complete. Practical example. Instead of complaining about a low salary, you learn a new skill at night. Sales, traffic, copywriting, basic investments. Not because it's easy, but because discipline. It begins when the excuse dies. And here's where something profound comes in. Taking responsibility doesn't erase the pain of the past, but it prevents it from dictating the future. Do you understand that? Faith. It's not about waiting for ideal conditions. It's about acting even when the scenario isn't cooperating. Small actions become rituals. Tracking expenses, studying personal finance, creating extra income, asking for feedback, adjusting course. This builds prosperity. It happens inside before it appears outside, like a root growing before the fruit. And when you realize you no longer feel like a victim, something curious happens. You start to make better choices about what you consume. The silent exchange. Less empty entertainment, more transformative knowledge. Without making any announcements or speeches, you begin to change your mental menu. Before, time slipped away with random videos, news that only generated anxiety, and series that distracted but didn't build anything. Now something different happens. You find pleasure in learning, in understanding how things really work. It's not that you've become anti-fun, you've just realized that excessive distraction takes a heavy toll on your life. Prosperity. And let's face it, nobody gets rich by spending attention as if it were infinite. This change alters the rhythm of your days. Instead of waking up and automatically grabbing your phone, you start with 10 minutes of reading or listening to audio. Simple, achievable, repeatable. Books like Think and Grow Rich, The Richest Man in Babylon, or even biographies of entrepreneurs become company names. This reprograms the mentality without fanfare, because new ideas emerge while old limitations disappear. Knowledge, when applied, becomes leverage, and this directly relates to faith in action. The most interesting thing is that you don't try to learn everything at once. You choose one topic at a time: money, sales, basic investments, communication. Practical example. Instead of watching 3 hours of isolated content, you watch a video and write down a concrete action to test the next day. This practice creates discipline because learning without applying it becomes mere entertainment in disguise. And little by little, you realize something powerful. The way you think is becoming different from most people's. When the mind changes, conversations change, choices change, paths begin to open up. You are no longer satisfied with superficiality. You want depth, clarity, strategy. This doesn't make you better than anyone else, just more aware of your own destiny. And awareness leads to responsibility, which leads to action, which leads to prosperity, almost inevitably. And then comes the next step. Because when the mind expands, the eyes begin to see opportunities where others only see problems. Seeing opportunities where most only see problems. At some point along the way, you begin to notice something curious. Crisis has become a sign, not a sentence. While many people panic, you take a deep breath and think, there's got to be a way. It's not blind optimism. It's a scenario analysis with mentality trained. You understand that every problem carries an unmet need, and an unmet need is an opportunity in disguise. That's how prosperity. It usually knocks on the door, without warning and without glamour. This change appears in everyday life. When someone complains about a high price, you think of a solution. When the market tightens, you observe where people are spending despite the crisis. Practical example. Instead of complaining about bad internet, you offer local service. Instead of criticizing expensive companies, you create a simple and accessible version. Those who solve problems become a reference point, and reference points attract money. It also understands that problems themselves are training. Financial difficulties teach management. Rejection teaches resilience. Mistakes teach fine-tuning. Nothing is wasted when there is faith behind the scenes of the process. What seemed like a delay becomes a silent, almost invisible preparation. And, without realizing it, you begin to think like someone who builds, not like someone who reacts. The most powerful thing is that it changes your emotional posture. Instead of complaining, you ask questions. Instead of freezing, you test. Small tests become laboratories. Selling something simple, validating an idea, providing a service on the weekend. This proactive attitude creates discipline practical, not theoretical, and brings closer to prosperity from reality. And when you start acting like that, a new discomfort arises. Certain people and environments no longer make sense. The natural distancing from negative people and environments. Without arguments, announcements, or drama, you begin to distance yourself. Conversations that once seemed normal now sound repetitive, heavy, and full of complaints. It's not arrogance, nor a sense of superiority. It's self-preservation. Mentality. You realize that environment shapes behavior, and behavior builds destiny. And destiny has everything to do with prosperity. This distancing is initially unsettling. A silent guilt arises. Am I changing too much? Am I getting too big for my britches? But the answer quickly becomes apparent. Every time you leave certain environments, the energy returns. A practical example. Less time with those who only complain. More time with those who exchange ideas about projects, learning, and vision for the future. This fuels the faith without needing religious discourse. You learn, through experience, that people influence you more than advice. Being around those who live in scarcity drags you down. Being around those who build things up pulls you forward. So you start to choose better where you sit, who you have lunch with, who you listen to. It could be an online group, a book, a distant mentor. Environment is also mental. And this choice requires discipline. Because what's comfortable isn't always right. The curious thing is that, by distancing yourself from the noise, you begin to hear your own inner voice better. Decisions become clearer, doubts diminish, and courage increases. It's as if silence creates space for prosperity to grow. And little by little, new connections appear. Aligned, strategic, necessary. And it is at this point that something even stronger develops. The ability to act even without motivation. When discipline starts to take precedence over motivation, motivation is no longer the primary driver. Before, you only acted when you were excited. Now, you act because you've decided to. No matter what. The excitement comes and goes, but the discipline. It stays firm, silent, reliable. And that changes everything because prosperity, it doesn't respond to emotional peaks, it responds to consistency. Those who wait for willpower end up waiting too long. In practice, the routine begins to include small, non-negotiable commitments. These aren't grand, heroic gestures, but simple habits. Studying a little every day, organizing finances, keeping to schedules. A real-life example. Even when tired, you review your weekly expenses or send a proposal you've been putting off. Nothing glamorous, but extremely effective for building a positive mindset, skill, etc. Mentality winner. That's how the game starts to turn behind the scenes. He also understands a harsh yet liberating truth. No one is going to save him. And curiously, this doesn't generate fear. It generates focus. His faith, it matures because it ceases to be emotion and becomes applied confidence. You learn that God honors action, not a well-explained excuse. And every small action done without applause strengthens character. What's most interesting is that this discipline creates something rare: predictability of results. When you do what needs to be done, even without the will to, the results appear, albeit late. This builds real self-esteem, not the kind inflated by pretty phrases. And with solid self-esteem, the prosperity, it finds fertile ground. But there's still a silent ingredient missing, something that begins before the achievement: anticipatory gratitude. Gratitude for what has not yet arrived. At some point in the journey, you realize something counterintuitive. Giving thanks beforehand changes everything. While many are only grateful after the result, you begin to practice gratitude in the middle of the process. It's not pretending, it's genuine, faith applied, acting as if you trust the outcome even without seeing it. This adjusts the mentality because the mind stops operating in a state of lack and starts operating in a state of healthy expectation. And correct expectation opens up space for prosperity. This practice appears in simple things. You give thanks for the learning experience, even when the day was difficult. You give thanks for the opportunity to try again, even when something didn't work out. Practical example. Before going to sleep, you write down 3 things you are grateful for, including goals not yet achieved. This habit changes the focus and strengthens the discipline emotional. The interesting thing is that gratitude doesn't make you passive. It makes you confident. Those who give thanks beforehand act with more ease and less desperation. You don't make decisions out of fear, but out of vision. This creates an inner posture that attracts opportunities and the right people. Prospering, at this level, begins from within and overflows outward. Over time, you realize that complaining has become strange, almost uncomfortable. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've chosen to trust the process. Faith, it stops being just talk and becomes daily behavior. And when someone around you prospers, something unexpected happens inside you. Instead of envy, genuine joy arises. And that reveals the next sign: genuine joy at the success of others. At some point, you notice a subtle but powerful shift within your heart. When someone close to you prospers, grows, or succeeds, there's no discomfort. There's a smile. It's not comparison, it's confirmation. If it worked for them, it can work for me. This reaction reveals a mentality that has already moved from scarcity to abundance, and abundance is fertile ground for prosperity. You understand that envy is a sign of fear, not ambition. Those who believe the world is limited fight over crumbs. Those who have faith celebrate achievements. A practical example: instead of criticizing someone who has made money, you study the path they took. You ask questions, observe, learn, transforming admiration into strategy. This requires discipline, emotional intelligence, and inner maturity. This joy isn't forced, it's cultivated. You remind yourself that the success of others doesn't steal yours, it only shows you the way. Every victory you witness becomes living proof that faith, it works when it finds action. And the more you celebrate, the lighter your heart becomes, and the clearer your focus. Prosperity doesn't like a heavy heart. Over time, you notice something curious. Prosperous people gravitate towards you. Because energy attracts energy, vision attracts vision. Those who vibrate with abundance end up being included in conversations, ideas, and opportunities. And this happens effortlessly, almost naturally. But to sustain this new level, you need to learn to listen to something even deeper: your own intuition. Trust your intuition more than just logic. There comes a point when you realize not everything that makes sense on paper makes sense in real life. Spreadsheets help, numbers guide you, but there's a silent voice that sees before reason. You learn to respect that intuition, not as an impulse, but as refined perception. It's the mentality aligned with faith, functioning like an internal radar. And those who ignore this radar usually pay a high price later. Remember decisions that didn't add up the numbers, but turned out well. And also remember ignored internal warnings that resulted in losses or regret. A practical example: something inside you tells you not to get into a certain business, even with promises of quick profits. Or it points to a simple, almost obvious path that no one is looking at. This listening requires silence, focus, and discipline emotional. Over time, you understand that intuition isn't magic. It's trained sensitivity. The more you study, pray, observe, and act consciously, the clearer that voice becomes. It doesn't shout, it doesn't pressure, it guides. And when you learn to trust it, decision-making becomes lighter and more precise. This speeds things up prosperity because it avoids unnecessary mistakes. The most curious thing is that this confidence brings peace. Even when faced with big choices, you feel inner security, faith. It stops being anxiety about the future and becomes presence in the present. And when someone acts like that, money ceases to be the central focus of their decisions. Because something bigger begins to take over: purpose. When money ceases to be the goal and becomes a consequence. At some point in adulthood, you realize something that completely changes the game. Money alone doesn't sustain the soul. Before, the goal was to earn more, accumulate, prove your worth. Now the question is different: what's the point of all this? This change reveals a mentality higher, where the prosperity. It ceases to be an end in itself and becomes a tool. You understand that wealth without direction becomes a burden, not freedom. And purpose gives meaning even to exhausting effort. This translates into more conscious choices. You start thinking about impact, usefulness, service, not just financial return. Practical example: when creating a business, you ask yourself what real problem it solves and who it actually helps. Interestingly, when the focus shifts away from money, the money starts to appear more consistently. Because, faith aligned with value, it generates lasting results. You also realize that purpose demands responsibility. You can't ask for abundance and live in perpetual improvisation. So you organize, plan, study, execute, with discipline and clarity. Money becomes a natural consequence for someone who delivers real value to the world. And that takes the weight off anxiety and brings peace. The most powerful thing is that you stop competing and start building. You don't chase, you attract. You don't beg, you offer. Prosperity. It flows because there's alignment between who you are, what you do, and why you do it. And when that alignment happens, the path opens up almost inevitably. Now, with all these signs in hand, it's time to tie the story together from the beginning. Because everything starts before the first sign. Time to turn awareness into action. Now let me ask you a direct question, one that doesn't require a quick answer. How many of these signs did you recognize in yourself throughout the video? It doesn't have to be all of them. Sometimes recognizing half is already proof that something is in motion. Because mentality. It doesn't change all at once. It adjusts gradually, consciously. Discipline and faith applied. And prosperity doesn't respond to those who merely agree, but to those who act. The knowledge you've gained here is worthless if it remains only an inspiration. So, what will you do differently from today onwards? Will you continue consuming content and postponing decisions, or will you use this as a turning point? What habit do you need to break? What attitude do you need to start? What conversation do you need to have with yourself? Prosperity. It starts precisely with the choice you avoid making. Notice how everything connects. Environment, responsibility, learning, action, purpose. Nothing here is magical, but everything requires courage. And courage is acting even without absolute certainty. That is faith practice. If you apply just one idea from this video for 7 consecutive days, your perception will already begin to change. And when perception changes, opportunities arise. Now, if this content resonated with you, Don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stick around. There's a new message every week to help you align your thoughts, mentality, strengthen discipline, and unlock prosperity in a real way. And comment below, which of these signs resonated with you the most today? When you take a stand, you take the first step.